Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the Deconstruction Zone. We're on one of our unique but growing more frequent video episodes well, I guess they're all video episodes. That's a stupid thing to say, but a Zoom episode where we're engaged in this way. And we are blessed beyond measure to have our guest, Carlos. You host the Deconstruct Everything podcast. We just did an episode with you. We were talking about how you kind of found us through TikTok, but have been on your own deconstruction journey, started the podcast. And so, why don't you just introduce yourself, like who you are, tell us a little about your podcast, and then maybe like a short snippet of like why you are into the deconstruction movement and a part of this journey yourself.
So, if you've discovered Deconstruction Zone, it was probably through that viral video. I mean, it was for me, and that viral video being the that it sucks to lose community, and that's kind of what happened to me over the past 3 years, and it was compounded on top of the pandemic happening,
Sure.
and like so, it was like I feel like it was extra worse for people who are deconstructing now that you're not only are you like not seeing people at church every week, you're also leaving church. And I felt like I needed to, this sounds really silly, but this is just the way my brain works. I needed like organized, scheduled time to talk to people because if I don't do that, then I was going to die. And so I feel like the podcast was kind of like an excuse for me to, like, it forced me to go out, meet friends, and talk to people. And I feel like I gained a friend in our recording of for our podcast.
Good.
I
That's one-sided.
yeah, we're not friends yet. But I feel like that's what it's been for me for the podcast, and um, uh, it's scheduled talking to people, and that's how it started for me. But yeah, that's the reason why, and I'm deconstructing. That's what's happening in my life. So that's what a lot of the conversations are about. Um, yeah,
So, Carlos, you were in full-time ministry.
I was.
If you're willing to share, like, what was the process of? Because I'm sure before you left ministry, you were having questions for a while, and then
Yeah.
something was like, "I'm ready to go."
So it's I'm gonna try because y'all episodes are 30 minutes, right? It's a long story, but I'll try to sum it up as best I can. So I was born in Dominican. No, I was in ministry my whole life. I was a 4 day a week Christian. I was at church all the time, and that got to the point where I was like, I really want to do this full time. I want to be in ministry. I'm a musician. I went to Berklee College of Music, and I wanted to use my gift for the Lord. And I got into songwriting and production, and I was doing Spanish translations for Bethel. And so there's some versions of Bethel songs out there that are in Spanish because of me. um, but I was really into that, and I discovered this mega church in my state. And I knew that like the church that I'd grown up in, which is like a smaller all Hispanic church, wasn't gonna cut it in terms of me finding a job that was gonna help me pay rent and be in ministry. So I started attending the local mega church, and within months I was hired. Like I was at this church I started visiting around May, and I was on staff by September, October, and I worked there for 5.5 years. And while I was there, my mind started opening up to all new things. I mean, I grew up in the faith in an all Hispanic, it was people of color. Well, that's who I was surrounded by all the time, and the mega church was not that. And over time, 2015 happened, and like I discovered Bernie Sanders, and forget about it. It was a done deal by that point. I remember getting written up for having conversations with people in the lobby about like Jesus was a refugee.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, and it was also a time that I was like discovering my Dominicanness because I was born in DR, But like being around Hispanics all the time, you just think you're just kind of blend in with the crowd, and being Hispanic is just default. Like I scroll through my contacts list, everyone has an EZ at the end of their name. But when I started attending the mega church, like I was suddenly like a token, and it like I stood out like a sore thumb. And that like opened up my mind and my spirit to a lot of things that I just never thought about before. And by 2020, I'd gotten written up enough times that I was fired. And I was fired 4 days before Christmas. I had a 2-month-old child. I had just finished redesigning the church's website. And I think they like waited for me to finish. That's my theory that I hold to this day. Like 2 days before that, we had like a Zoom all staff meeting that had it was like over 100 people on staff, like this huge Zoom call. And the pastor photoshopped my face onto a Time magazine and was like, Carlos is part of the team that built the website, a team of the year. And he photoshopped our faces onto like Avengers bodies, like we were all ripped. And so we won team of the year, and I was fired like 3 days after that.
Dang.
And it was the first time that like in my life that I didn't have a church to go to on Sunday. And like my wife and I were like, we're not going to go to church for a while, like we need this break. And the reason I actually got fired was like I called out like racism on some person on Facebook or whatever that I didn't know was a pastor. So they like
Like
wrote
one
me
of
up.
your pastors of the church?
No, it was like some other pastor in New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just doxed myself. There aren't that many mega churches in New Jersey, so you're gonna find me. But no, it's okay. But the during those couple months, I got in our previous podcast recording, we use this metaphor about it being like a relationship, but like I had never been single. So I was like immediately I was rebounding, and we jumped into the first church we could find. And I started attending this church, and within 3 months I was on like volunteer staff. Literally recorded an album with these people. Was like in songwriting sessions, and we had like Hillsong come in, and like we were writing with them, and it was this whole thing. And I remember sitting there in this Hillsong writing session and be like, I don't think I believe in God anymore. Like to myself. And I remember like I was playing guitar and I just looked out. We were like on this stage doing like, working out like a new song. Um and I remember playing like, what if like this was all fake? And I remember thinking like strumming and being like, um what is the ripple effect that I'm having right now? Like this could potentially be like a big hit, like we're recording a song right now that might lead someone to like literally change their life and jump into pursuing a life with Christ. And I'm like, am I like tainting this? Am I like poisoning the wine or whatever? Like is like what's happening right now? And that was when I first started really thinking about it. And a couple months after that, slowly but surely, I told the worship pastors like I can't, in good faith, continue to serve, and that was the last time I attended church.
Hmm.
And that was, I mean, we're December. That was like May, so it was relatively recent. And I mean, it had been happening for me. I didn't realize it had been happening for me for years. But that's when I finally hit that point where it's like I can't keep doing this. And that's my story.
Yeah. Well, your story, I mean, Emily, I don't need to share your story for you, but that's like, I mean, essentially your story. The well was
My
Emily's.
rebound. I mean, I hate saying that. Like, I don't like saying that because I love The Well, and The Well showed me that I didn't have to choose between the 2, and I'm not like The Well definitely was my rebound, but I'm not against getting back together with The Well eventually. You know what I'm saying, Danny? Like, I don't like to say that you guys were my rebound because it was so much more than that. But, like,
Yeah.
yeah, but at the same time, 100% Carlos. Like, it was I mean, immediately. And part of this is on me and my like need to feel like I only have value if I'm serving a lot, but like jumped right into the well and I was like, what can I do to serve and do all this and like got to preach, which was still to this day like a life-changing moment for me as a woman that I was allowed to do that, like was so incredible. But I just like jumped all in and realized that like I hadn't really spent time being single or like healing and was like burning out because I jumped right back in just like I do in any other church and not actually caring for like what I needed in my spiritual journey. And so like I mean it is because it's hard to be single.
Hmm.
I was single for like single. I was church single for like 3 months I think before I joined the well and I was like I have to get into like a relationship again. I'm
Hmm.
really just again hammering this analogy, but it's like I like couldn't be
I
alone.
don't even think it's an analogy. I mean, the Bible
Yeah,
refers to it as a relationship. Like that's what it is.
true.
And I feel like I didn't want to be a nothingist. I didn't want to be agnostic. To me, those were like icky words that I wanted nothing to do with. And I'm embracing them now, but I I'd always grown up being told it's like you need something. You need faith. You need like you can't live without this stuff, and you'll die and you'll wither into this hellbound like creature or whatever. And like I still, even to this day, I still get like that feeling. I don't possess the belief that I'm going to hell, but I still get that feeling that I'm going to hell like
Yeah.
all the time. Um,
For I think for me, it was like to say that like I don't think I'm a Christian anymore felt like everyone who warned me against deconstruction was right.
mm,
And that was really hard for me to be open about that because I would always be like, I can ask questions, and that doesn't mean that I'm not a Christian. Like, chill out. And then, but then I was like, oh, so this kind of led to like where you guys thought it would lead. Now, I don't think that this means that I'm going to hell like you guys do, but it's still frustrating because part of me feels like they called it and I'm very stubborn and I don't like that.
So I have an interesting, like, and this is a kind of question for both of you, but like, so each of your stories of deconstruction start with a person or an institution, not a belief,
mm,
right? And belief things came later, and maybe there were belief things underneath that you, like Carlos, you said this a little bit ago. It's like you had some doubts and reservations maybe earlier on, and like you said, like going from a space that you're mostly around people of color, and then you're in a primarily white space. I'm sure that, like, I don't know how long even occupying a space like that would have been that healthy for you, but like how much do you connect the two, right? Like, because there's these catalytic moments that seem to be what start the deconstruction, and I'm always like intrigued by this, because it's like, say there was never that catalytic moment, would you still be deeply devoted? Like, because you're singing there and you're in this, you're playing your guitar, like, do I believe this is all fake? Would you have prayed that same prayer of, is this all fake, had you not been
ooh,
fired?
that's a prayer.
And like, and Emily, would
Mm.
you have not, have you like gone through this journey had you not had such a traumatic experience, like in your internship or in some of these, like how much did those moments, you think, impact the later on deconstruction and wrestling with certain
I,
beliefs?
I could tell you how it looked like for me. So I remember, the way that my time in church looked was I would constantly refer to being at church as being like a nourishing thing. It's like you have this
Mm.
thing in you, you have your spirit, you have your belief, you have your faith, and it needs to be nourished. Like it needs to be cultivated and cared for. And I always saw, and part of the reason why I rebounded so quickly was I always saw um not doing that, like not engaging weekly church practice and hearing a sermon every week as being like, I'm gonna wither on the vine, like that thing in me is gonna die. And when like I had never not gone to church. Like I've always gone to church. I remember when I was a kid, one time we didn't go to church one time because we had like a family reunion, and I was like, we're gonna go to hell. Like, like we missed church this week to have fun with our families. Like this is not good.
Yeah.
And I've always kind of felt that way, where it's like you need a shepherd, you need a church, you need to hear a weekly sermon to keep it alive. And when it stopped, I was like, oh my gosh, this is why. The reason why I needed it to be that way is because it's almost like if you're running on empty on a car and you're constantly getting a drop of gas. And do you are these people that ride motorcycles and they'll literally give their motorcycle one squirt. They'll go to like the gas station and they go,
Mhm.
"Chit." And it's like that'll get me through the day. Literally, it'll last them the whole day. And I felt that way about church. It's like my
Mm.
faith was at a point where I needed to be in a nourishing environment for the faith, because as soon as I get into these questions, I was out. Like as soon as I thought like, what do we do about gay people? It's like, well, let's think about how you're going to treat your wife this week, or let's think about something else. Let's like the conversation was
Mm.
constantly being redirected. And I
Yeah.
think that if you just if like if we had like if a pastor did this thing where it's like, we're gonna not go to church for 1 month. We're just gonna cancel church for a month. Like half the congregation would leave. Like that's how I felt. And I feel like the pandemic did that for a lot of people. It's like
Yeah.
my wife. I remember because I was in ministry, I had to wake up super early, like 5:30 in the morning, and um, I would leave the house. I had to leave. Yeah, no, I had to leave the house by like 6:15, right? And we have toddlers, so my wife was like, "I'm not doing that. Like, get out of here. Like, I'll meet you there later if I meet you there at all, because my kids were little. At the time I had a 1 year old and a newborn, and so she didn't go to church like ever. She went to church, especially during the pandemic. It was like, we're not doing this, and like I couldn't stay and like help her. Like it was logistically difficult, and I saw it happening to her, and I was like, is this what's going to happen? Like this is what happens, like when you don't go to church. And when it started happening for me just because the church hurt or whatever, and this is another mistake that I feel like a lot of Christians make. It's like, oh, you're just deconstruction because of church hurt. It's like, no, that was just the catalyst that got me out for a little bit, like
Yeah.
it's been kind of happening for a while for me. And I also get things where it's like, well, you were probably never a Christian to begin with. It's like, dude, I was like writing Christian music. Like there's songs you've sang, I probably was part of writing. Like I was
Mhm.
in it, and I believed it more than anything. Um, but yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's interesting, right? Like, kind of at the end of that, Carlos, you kinda got back to Danny's question of, like, if those things hadn't happened, would we be where we are? And I just as I was processing it, I was like, there was so many things in that time that it was like a perfect storm of, like, one of them if 0 of them would happen, maybe it would have taken me longer, but I think there will always be if there are doubts and questions in you, anything can become a catalyst, I
Sure.
would say. So, like, right around that time, because I think, like, my internship happened, the pandemic happened, I got into a relationship with a non-Presbyterian, and then, like, I started stand-up comedy and started, like, being around people that were different than me
Mm,
for, like, the first time. And so, like, all of those things played into it. Yes, maybe if none of those 4 things had happened, it wouldn't be on this timeline. I think that's totally fair to say, but that I think that anything can be a catalyst if you're ready to deconstruct, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that because I think like I one misconception people have about me, like as a pastor, is like I don't have doubts. Like there are things that I like wrestle with and I doubt, and I try to be as open with it, like not only for my own sake, but for people understanding. It's like to be a pastor doesn't mean that you have all the answers, and if someone says they have no
Mhm.
doubts or all the answers, you're like talking to a liar probably. And so it's like to be as open and honest, I think is interesting. And so I just think about it like my divorce could have been a catalyst, right? Or like there are other things that
Mm.
could have been weren't the case for me. And so I was like exploring that because I think again our experiences impact how our faith goes, our deconstruction. I even think you two are so interesting because you're on completely opposite ends of the spectrum of religion in some ways. Like you're worshiping the same God, but from my assumption is like you're pretty like charismatic, Carlos. Is that
yeah,
right? Like, and,
definitely.
and Emily's much more mind. So we got like heart on one side in mind on the other, but you both ended up in the same place. And I think there's an
Mm,
interesting thread of the journey of deconstruction there. It's like it's not just one denomination or one type or one ethos that of people that are deconstructing. It's kind of like people from all different walks of life and different faith spaces are finding themselves here. And that's the reason I think this conversation is so important. Because it's like it's such a diverse group of people that are a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Diversity.
so
Yeah.
I mean, so speaking of diversity, solid segue. I'm really
I think we have the
um
same. I already. Go ahead.
yeah, the same. Okay, I didn't mean to cut you off, Carlos, but I'm really intrigued if you're willing to talk about it, by the idea of like decolonizing faith or colonization and deconstruction, because that's something that is like to white people, like Danny and I don't really relate to that in the same way that maybe you do, or view it in the same way that you do. So I would really love to hear kind of how that came up and how you continue to think about that and how that shaped your journey.
It shaped it a lot. My
Hmm.
I told the story a bunch of another podcast, whatever. But um, my grandmothers died, both of them, within a year of each other, around the same time. Like one died like late 2020. I'm messing the years up, but it was like 2019 and 2020. And my like connection to Dominican Republic was like withering, and like a lot of my family is moving here to the States, and I still have a couple uncles down there, but it's like I wanted to like get in touch with my Dominicanness. Like I wanted to like reconnect with my roots. I mean, it's not even like old, you know, it's not even that far back in my family's history. Like I was literally born there. So it's like I wanted to feel connected to Dominican Republic as I was before. And I started like reading books and just getting into Dominican culture and whatever. And I just realized how much of the faith or the Christianity had an impact on Dominican history. And I'm like, man, this is like it's I started to see Dominicans almost kind of like how Americans see people that live in the Middle East. It's like it's these religious countries. It's like I remember as a Christian, I'd be like, you're just Muslim because you were like you came from a Muslim country. And eventually I realized like I'm Christian for the same reason. Like it's no different.
Mm,
And then there's also like the thing about colonization with like race and stuff. So like Dominican Republic, it was like if I think the first, if not one of the first places where Christopher Columbus landed. And I grew up in an anti-Columbus household. Like Columbus was like Hitler in my mom's, to this day my mom still feels that way. And like well, I still have this conversation with my mom. It's like, Mom, you're only Christian because Columbus was. And she hates that. She like hates hearing that. And I can't shake that fact. It's something that like I think about often, and it's had a big impact on how I see Christian faith nowadays.
I think it no, like it's so interesting because I remember being in college and talking about colonization and about how like so much of it was just getting like other people in other countries to be Christian. And
Mhm.
it was so I like when I was still a fundamentalist, hearing those stories was so weird because I was like holding in tune like, okay, well you just completely disrespected and like messed up like this whole culture and just infiltrated it. But at the same time, I was like, but at least now they're not going to hell. So it's like when you know what I'm saying? So like as a
Yeah.
fundamentalist, it's very hard to engage that conversation if you still believe in hell, in my opinion. Because you can like all day you can be like, yeah, that was kind of shitty, but you're also like, but at least you're saved. So
Mhm.
I think I wasn't able to enter into that conversation even a little bit until I deconstructed the idea of like a literal hell where non-believers go. What about you, Danny?
Yeah, I don't exactly know the question you're asking me, but I do think it's almost impossible to be an evangelist without being a colonist. Like, I mean,
Mm.
Mm,
evangelism is colonization, right? And I think that's such an interesting thing. And like, I wrestle with that because like I think faith, and I have like I have interesting and personal held beliefs on heaven and hell, but I also like I actively want to share my faith with people because I think it matters, and I think that it's been formative for me. But there's a difference in like offering someone something and then forcing them to receive it. And like that's the difference between I think sharing your faith and colonizing people with your faith. And I even think like in the Methodist Church, right? Like the Methodist Church is kind of religiously colonized Africa. And right now we're about to split over inclusion. And there's a lot of like conservative voices in Africa that are Methodist. And I was like, well, it's because you colonized them with conservative voice. Like you told them what they had to believe, and now you're mad that they believe it. And so I think I just think there's an interesting connection. And like Emily said, I'm a pretty like we're two just like white people within the conversation, but we want to engage conversations of racial justice. What I realized, I mean, you talked about 2015 being a big time in life, and there's been a lot of like issues of racial inequality and injustice in the past decade. I mean, they've been happening forever, but that have been really publicized. And the thing that I've realized, like, just because like I'm a white person in the conversation doesn't mean that I can't engage in the conversation. It's like
Mm.
to engage in it, but also not go to the default of being like the colonizer of the conversation, right? Like I think that's as a straight white guy, I hold about as much privilege as a human can have. And so I always have to toe the line of humility and leveraging that privilege for the sake of good, you know?
And And I think also, like, something I'm processing, I'm an English teacher, and so, like, I find a lot of value in reading the text at the time, and so when you think about, like, Columbus and colonizing and things like that, if you read the writings around that time, it's all of like, well, we have to convert these people because they're barbarians and they have, like, nothing to offer, and so, like, Danny, I was thinking about you, like, you're like, "Well, I still wanna, like, share my faith," and I think we all long to share things that we love and bring us joy, and I don't
Mm,
think that that is inherently colonizing, especially in my opinion, Carlos, you may disagree, if, like, you're not viewing that person as, like, wrong until they agree with you, but to say,
mm,
like, I love pizza, okay? And if I'm like, "You guys should all try pizza," as if it's, like, some crazy thing. Like, you guys would love it. I'm not gonna be like, "Well, you're an idiot and you got bring no value to the table until you try pizza." Like,
Yeah.
to me, that's where I hear the difference, but Carlos, you may have a different perspective on that.
I think for me, it was kind of like realizing that what I believed at the time was dogma. It's like Columbus and the colonizers,
Mm,
whatever, they came with this idea and it was like a pre-built thing. And I was just kind of accepting things as just being inherently true. Like it was essentially like I inherited some of these beliefs. And deconstruction for me has been kind of like dismantling. It's like, well, maybe this, maybe this doesn't have to be true. Maybe God isn't necessarily good, even if he does exist, like that sort of thing. Like these are conversations that like I wasn't having before, because I hadn't realized until now that like they were, it was dogma, and yeah, I'm still doing that. Like I'm still going through like one concept a week. It's like my new thing is like free will. It's like, do Christians really believe in free will? If the choice is hell or it's like believe or go to hell. And Emily's like, that's a taste too. But that's another time consuming podcast episode.
Yeah, I do think we had Tim Whitaker on from the New Evangelicals. I think I mentioned him to you. I don't know if you follow him or not. He's a really good follow in the kind of deconstruction space. Someone maybe like me who's like not left their faith, but is like trying to dismantle kind of what he knew. But he used a great phrase, and it sounds like a little bit of where you're at, and I think it rang true for where Emily's at. Like a lot of deconstruction, whether you end up like a deeply devoted Christian at the end, or you're a functional agnostic, or whatever it is, or an atheist, I think is a lot of untangling was the term he used. Like because all of it's
mm,
up in each other, and it's like you didn't realize that the connection between heaven and hell and free will and predestination and all of these other things, and then adding some of the other elements on top of it of cultural context and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I think we don't always do justice to in the conversation, is understanding that these things are way more interconnected and tangled up than we ever
Yep.
thought they were, and they are not like neat boxed out theologies. They are interwoven. And we use this early on, like I said, it's like a Jenga tower, and you pull enough out, it's going to fall.
Hmm.
That was so good. I killed the conversation.
But also, but also what I was thinking of is you use this analogy, Danny, of the Jenga tower, but then you don't even realize it, and you've built another tower with the same blocks.
Yeah.
And that is so true, right? Because it's like, in some ways, the blocks feel inescapable. Like you want new blocks, but you're using the same blocks, and you're building a different tower. And all of a sudden, you'll be like, "Oh my god!" But that is Calvinism. You're like, "Oh, that is colonization," even in my new belief system, which I think is
For me,
just really
man, it's
crazy.
like you don't have to build a tower. You could just like build like a dinosaur. Like you could build whatever you want, and that for me was like impossible. I didn't see it as
Mm,
possible. It's like you give me these pieces. Like what is this tower going to look like? It's like it doesn't have to
Mm.
be a tower at all. Um, One thing that helped me a lot. I don't know if you've heard of Should I Stay Christian by Brian McLaren. Um, it was really helpful for me. It's this book that it kind of like sells both directions. It's like, should I stay Christian or not? And the first half of the book is like, here's why you shouldn't. And the second half of the book is like, here's why you should. And then the last part of the book is just kind of like helping you process, the decision and what
mm,
what the decision should look like. And I feel like whether you are deconstructing or not or whatever, if you just want to understand someone who's deconstructing, wherever you are in the journey, it's helpful. Like it'll leave you a more healthy thinker, I think.
Mm.
Should I Say Christian by McLaren?
That's good.
it's written down.
Well, I have enjoyed this conversation. Unfortunately, I'm the a-hole who has a hard stop in recording, but
Yeah.
you had us on your podcast. We said this. We got to do this again. I would actually love to have you on again just to discuss even deeper. Like I think we dipped a toe into some of the kind of racial issues that are in deconstruction, also the topic of colonization, and I think that's so interesting in the sense that like Emily and I have been our part of this conversation, but my favorite thing about guests is we see the cube from a different angle by having different people speak into it. And so I would love to have this conversation again and dive deeper into that. But before we wrap up, like what would be if you could give some level of like you said a nugget on yours. Usually we end with encouragement. Like what would be your encouragement for someone in deconstruction? But like, I mean, it's your thought, your table. Like what would you want to leave our listeners with before we go?
I've said this on another podcast, but I'm going to say it again. Um, Give yourself permission. It's like give yourself permission to start the journey, or whatever the case is. And I think that like some Christians are afraid of like starting this. Like I don't want to start pulling on the string because I might lose my sweater. It's like there's a solid chance that you'll just end up being a more faithful Christian after this. And I've seen it happen many, many times. I've seen it happen as often as not the case. Like I've seen them both happen
Mhm.
Yeah.
equally. And so I think you'll be in a healthier place than not giving yourself permission
Hmm.
to ask the questions and do the research and do the reading, whatever. But that book helped me a lot. Uh, yeah, that's my encouragement is give yourself permission to take it apart and see what you end up with.
Awesome. I like that. I love
Um,
that. Sorry, Emily, before like you did this question in the beginning, Carlos. So just say a little bit more about your podcast and where people can find it. Because you like said it had a name, but I don't think you said much about it.
Oh yeah, you can find it at depod.net. All the links are there. That's it.
Perfect. All right. Emily, I cut
all
you off.
right. Well, yeah, definitely check out Carlos's Deconstruct Everything podcast. And Carlos, we're so thankful that you had this conversation with us and provided a new perspective. And as always, everybody, thanks for listening and embrace the journey.